Okay, so welcome. I'm Helen Draper, author, advisor, and speaker. And I'll tell you a bit more about my story as we get into this and what inspired Climate Calm. But this workshop today is part of a series where I'm teaching the Climate Calm method. The full method itself is 7 steps. And I have written it into a book proposal that's just been submitted to a major publisher. So the 7 steps in the full book, where I develop this in much more detail. Obviously, we won't have time to go through all of that today, but we're going to focus on the first 3 steps, which is stop and center, identify, and release. So just to sort of recap on that, stop and center, identify, and release. And this is all about releasing that feeling of having to be a certain way when we show up for the climate crisis, and this sort of media narrative noise around what's happening, climate being in the news as becoming increasingly severe on a daily basis, that it gives us that sense of, oh my gosh, I've got to do something. And it also sets off the nervous system if you internalize that into a state of fight or flight. So in this session, we talk about nervous system regulation to create space and clarity for climate solutions. We break through 3 of these identity traps that can lead to climate anxiety. But to me, it's more than climate anxiety. There's like these whole emotions that can show up in different ways for different people that lead to complete overwhelm, or perhaps like complete resistance and disengagement from the whole agenda. And that's really interesting because it breaks the stereotype that climate anxiety is like this young person's issue, when we consider that, of course, all of us are going to have an emotional response to the difficult times that we find ourselves in. So before we launch onto that, I'm going to do a method that's very familiar to those of us who have been on some of these healing journeys, or if it isn't, it's just something to add to your toolbox of well-being. We're just going to stop and center for a moment so you can follow along with me. So just kind of settle into where you are, make yourselves comfortable. It's really good to have your feet grounded on the floor. So what I often do is sort of kick off my fluffy slippers and make sure they're resting comfortably on the floor, and you're in a comfortable, relatively upright position, however that works for you. And we're just going to stop and take a couple of deep breaths. And in through the nose and out through the mouth. We're just going to tune into some senses now. So I've got my eyes closed. Feel free to just soften your gaze if that's not comfortable, or shut your eyes and tune into 5 things that we can feel. Could be on your skin, could be your feet on the floor. I'm just going to be quiet for a moment and let you tune in. And as you keep taking those long breaths, start tuning into the things that you can hear, just background noises. Once you've cycled gently through 5 things that you can hear, we'll move on to things that you can see. So really gently open your eyes and just let those things come to you. See my laptop, the window, my plant nursery around me, shelf, and a tree. Just sort of take a moment back into the body. Now, as many of you know, I discovered this on my healing journey. This is a well-being method that I believe would really shift the energy around climate conversations. 90% of the meetings I was going to as a professional, back-to-back meetings with people who are responsible decision makers for change and for climate action, the energy around this is just like boom, boom, boom. And there's a lot of conflict and adversary, and amongst activists, there's often like differences of opinion that really come out in quite a high stress of environment. And just taking that moment to ground and settle, we've already kind of, it's slowed down, it's shifted the energy of even this conversation. It makes me speak slower because I do speak rather fast, and I find that really, really helpful. We're always looking for quick steps for the climate and kind of what's the quick takeaway we can take, and that's emphasized by the social media environment around us as well. But I think taking that moment is just really powerful and opens up possibilities. And the science supports that, in that when our nervous systems are activated, we don't see the bigger picture, and climate action is about the bigger picture. All these changes that we can make are interconnected, and systems across the globe and systems across the human environment are all interwoven in a way that's highly complex. And just to take a step back from that really transforms the energy of the conversation, from one where when our systems are like activated, we see tunnel vision, and when we can slow down, we do actually see this bigger picture. So I've been to many climate conferences where you get like experts drilling down to detail, and they just get very, very tunnel vision. And sometimes if we do that, we miss the bigger picture. And then we take that home, and we're, juggling daily life and can't possibly think about all the implications when we're running around the supermarket and the things that we pick up. But it makes it easier if we are able to just take a break from that sense of overwhelm and that leads to burnout, and just take that moment to stop and center. So I have also a video on this. So those of you who have registered, and if you're watching the replay as well, you've been sent a link, or you will be sent a link as part of the 3 steps over a course of a few days, which contains all the notes of this, but also a link to a video just to kind of help remind you and something to practice, because this is a tool that you can just add to your toolbox for every day. And I think it's really powerful. If you imagine sort of the fight or flight reaction as well, if you're being chased by a polar bear, I really like this analogy. Right, this is not just a bear; it's a polar bear. Now you're being chased by a polar bear, and you're going to fight or flight, and your systems kind of concentrate on what they need to do to keep you alive, and that's to run or to fight the polar bear, although that's probably not to be recommended. But there's no way that you're able at that point of time to analyze all the systems transformations and opportunities to address climate change and to actually save that polar bear from their habitat from melting under their little paws. So that's just something to think about when we talk about the biochemical changes in our body, and adrenaline and cortisol, and how we activate the fight or flight systems through nervous system science. And I think sort of going forward, I'd love to see that happen more often in my own meetings and in others, where we just take that moment to break the cycle of overwhelm. So that's step 1, stop and center. Incredibly simple for those of you who'll be familiar with it, or for those of you less familiar, just build that into your toolkit and see how it goes. Give me some feedback. And now that we've got started, I'm going to briefly introduce myself and what inspired Climate Calm. For almost 2 decades, I worked at the forefront of UK climate solutions. For example, at renewable energy, where I started my career, I was working on Europe's largest onshore wind farms. And then I launched into more of a systems transformation place and started working with government clients on whole systems transformation and policy and strategy to get us to net zero, and kind of worked up that career ladder and became net zero leader at a major global engineering firm. I was also deputy leader of Wales Green Party, and this was around about sort of the time of the pandemic, and I was raising a toddler through the pandemic. And probably familiar to people on this call, I was looking back, I was probably doing too much. But I had internalized this sense of the climate emergency, so I was doing more and more, including a lot of voluntary work in politics. And then in 2021, I developed a condition called ME-CFS, which stopped me in my tracks. There's no medical cure for chronic fatigue syndrome, and for me it hit so suddenly. It saw me go from like running marathons to being unable to walk down the road to take my son to school. I was bedbound and I was housebound for periods of time, and this is a journey where I had no choice but to learn to prioritize my own well-being and to regulate my own nervous system. So through research and support from the Optimum Health Clinic and local clinic as well, I had to become my own expert on gut science, on nervous system regulation, and just sort of had that period of time when I was unable to work and I just had to focus in on myself and my recovery. And a really interesting thing happened through that journey is I thought that I was taking like a welcome break from this climate place, which for me it became like quite high stress and it become adversarial, and it's really tough being at a leadership level in climate, and I'm sure sort of any professionals who have been this will identify with that too. So I thought I'd stepped away from all that, but I realised that some of the changes that I was making, they were all really sustainable in climate terms. So partway through that journey, I looked at my own climate footprint and I actually measured it in one of the tools that's available online, which you can look up for yourselves as well, and realised that whilst focusing on my health and myself, like being completely selfish in transforming my life, my carbon footprint had actually reduced by a third. And it really pointed me in a direction which was about aligning everything that I'd learned about health and well-being with everything that I knew about what was impactful climate action, and just to sort of shift that energy around climate conversations, which just feels like can feel so difficult and can feel like an agenda of sacrifice, but actually is completely the opposite when we align well-being with climate solutions. So that's what inspired Climate Calm. And then I went to develop the Climate Calm method, launched the community, which please do sign up to, and wrote the book. So here I am, and I'm really keen to get this message out there and to help others. So offering free workshops and plenty of opportunities to get engaged in the agenda. So that is a little bit about me, far too much about me. So what we're going to do is just launch into step 2, which is to identify your climate persona. Now, step 2 is about who do you think you need to be when you're showing up for climate action. And what that involves is a climate persona quiz. I'm just making sure I get you the right link to put in the chat. Go. What I'll do is make sure that you can open this first and foremost, and that opens up a very short quiz. It is just a few questions, and it is based on stereotypes, so we don't need to take it too seriously on one level. and because we're looking at climate personas based on stereotypes, which are a synthesis of all the people I've met and worked with. So we can look at it quite light-hearted, but also it encourages us to explore and maybe ask some questions around how we've been showing up for the climate crisis today. So I will let me know if you can't access that. Otherwise, I'll give you just a few minutes to work through that quiz before I will then explain a little bit more about the climate personas and some aspects of those personas that trip us up. So if you can give me a little thumbs up in the chat when you're done, that would be brilliant. I'll just take a little bit of break, a little bit of quiet for you to get on with that. Thanks, Olivia. Right. So, got any immediate reactions to that? Feel free to type them in the box. Meanwhile, I'll introduce you to my little friends. Let's see who was first. Right, I'm going a bit retro with this. I am making this into an ebook, a workbook that you can sort of put thoughts in as well. But today I've got my little friends on little bits of paper here. So this is the first one, which if you got mainly A's or if you had some A's in that, this is the activist. And so frequently found on the front lines of environmental and social protest, the activist spends a lot of time and energy keeping up with the latest developments in climate news. And as a result, the activist is knowledgeable, passionate, and not afraid to stand up for a cause. Activists can put a lot of pressure on themselves to keep showing up and become overstretched. Fighting for a cause and internalizing a sense of urgency can put the activist's nervous system into a place of fight or flight. Frustration and anger at the resistance of other people and systems to change can feel and contribute to a sense of failure. And it can feel like what the activist does is never feels like enough. The activists can have a tendency to identify very personally with a campaign. So when a campaign comes to an end, they may experience a loss of identity. So for any activists out there, there's a bit of love. Next, we have the invested. This is mostly B's. The invested person may consider themselves more like average mainstream than the activists, but find themselves engaging and watching the news with anxiety and concern. Might be more politically engaged or vote for change in a different way. But for the invested, climate is personal. You may have really specific concerns and be motivated by something in your life, like protecting those that you love or finding safety in your own situation. And especially, for example, those affected by recent wildfires or flooding, this makes it really personal. And then that generates strong emotions associated with this. The investor can feel very deeply. So if there are challenging climate conversations, take that really to heart. Next, we have the leader. So someone who lives and breathes climate action, if you're mostly C's, they understand the bigger picture and find themselves in a professional community leadership roles. The leader tries to do everything in their power to gain a sense of control, as impacts seem to spin increasingly out of control and into chaos. Overwhelm and burnout amongst leaders is really high. I saw a statistic at the moment that says that 88% of professionals have experienced burnout in the last 2 years. So whether you identify as a leader or not, kind of some of this might be an issue for you. You can be pulled in lots of different directions, holding multiple perspectives and personas, like different hats for different situations, but that's really energy draining. And the leader's passion for work can make it difficult to untangle their sense of self and personal identity from everything that they do. And here I have mostly D's, is the overwhelmed. Look, picture of a little guy and his kids there. Overwhelm is a natural response to a scary situation, and I believe we all have parts of us that seek safety by disengaging from a difficult agenda. So it may be just a part of climate action that just doesn't resonate for you, and just looking at that with a bit more compassion. We can look upon denial and resistance with a bit more compassion when we understand its role in other people too. The overwhelmed likes black or white answers and can find this systems-wide climate perspective like really frustrating. And not wanting to know is a form of self-protection. It might be a short-term effective coping mechanism, but in the long term, it can lead to a sense of disconnect from self, lack of alignment with personal values. So just take a moment to consider if there's any specific part of the climate agenda that you haven't been able to engage in, and whether that sits with D, the overwhelmed there. Any thoughts, any reactions? In some of the workshops I've run, it's been the whole spectrum, which has been really interesting. It hasn't been mainly A's, maybe D's or whatever. It's been people either feeling very specific one of them or a mix of all of them, but there's been a really big range of responses. Wow. So one to take away with you. And again, you'll get the links to this survey and the description of the personas. And very soon I'll be sending out the link to a workbook too, if that is helpful for you. But just a moment to recognise really that climate is systems wide. So it pops up everywhere. In finance, in energy, in transport, in the economy, in food systems, in agriculture, in biodiversity, in nature. But for me, that means that there's opportunities everywhere, and to avoid that becoming overwhelming, just having a look at how we're showing up can be really powerful. Olivia's mostly B's and C's. I think being a step parent and expectant mother definitely comes into it. That is really interesting. I really resonate with that, because I only stepped into politics when I was pregnant. And the story goes that I waddled into the count 6 months pregnant when I was running for office. And I didn't want to do that. Didn't want to do the job, but I just felt that I really needed to show up for the climate agenda. And I've met so many people with similar stories that when they become a parent, it's like you literally have skin in the game. As do big political moments such as Trump getting into power. I don't know, I said his name. I try not to say his name because it's like gives energy into the wrong places. But yes, this does motivate us. So you know, this time of global disruption, I do think we are going through a really disruptive time, can be really motivating if we do it in a healthy way. I think it's an opportunity to drill down and double up on what's important to us and stand for our values, but from a place of health, not a place of reactivity and anger and frustration and all these difficult emotions that come up. Just take a moment to center on self and go, no, this is what's important to me, and this is how I'm going to go forward. Which very nicely links us on to question step 3. I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, so in thinking about your climate identity, you've done the hard work, really. I found this out through health coaching, and I know there's people on the call who've been through a very similar journey. I was almost kind of disappointed by the ease and simplicity of step 3, which is release. And these 3 steps that pop up everywhere in psychology is just kind of create a bit of space from how you've been showing up. Look at that, question that, and then release, which is step 3. And the simple take-home message from that, I'm going to borrow from Alex Howard, is if you can see it, you don't have to be it. So actually, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I'm identifying with this thing, how on earth am I gonna release that? But you've already done the hard work. It's incredibly powerful if you can catch that. And because we are creatures of habit, we run programs in the way that we operate. Our emotions drive our thoughts, that drive our actions. We're sort of used to doing things a particular way, but suddenly if you take these moments, particularly if you're into journaling and can reflect on this at the end of the day, just think, I don't know, that was quite a difficult climate conversation, or I was having difficulty with this decision, or this thing's really stressing me out. And just check in on those emotions, but check in on those identities, thinking, oh, I need to be like this to show up for the climate. I need to do this. I need to do that. And just actually think, oh, no, hang on, is this a stereotype? Is this really helping me be me? There are climate solutions happening when we get up, when we brush our teeth, when we sleep. Our money is getting up to things, and that's something that we can look at and actually decarbonize and shift away from fossil fuels quite easily. When we cook, when we eat, and just by taking a calm, centered approach to that and identifying what works for us, rather than saying, who do I need to be, and over identifying, can be really, really powerful. So if you can see it, you don't have to be it. And that is the take-home message of step 3. So this isn't a personal issue. You know, everything we have, all the climate solutions we need, and it's about choosing the best one, or the best mix of solutions for you. And rather than sort of labeling people into one solution or the other and pitching them against each other. And I share that as an example because you may have come across similar situations, or if you're discussing climate with your friends or family, you may have started to get that feeling that you're being labeled, or that you're being pushed into a particular climate identity. And in future, if I can catch that as it's happening, that's incredibly powerful. So if you can see it, don't have to be it. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off with a recap of the 3 steps. So number 1, stop and center. It's a transformative practice that allows you to regulate the nervous system and really show up as yourself. It creates space for that creativity and openness to solutions that are all around us where it comes to the climate crisis, and creates that sense of empowerment. And I think in a world where we've just tipped over that 1.5 degrees threshold of warming above pre-industrial levels, and where we've been hit by extreme weather events, you know, that this is really important to remember, and it can break that energy draining, reactive, emotional cycle to what's going on in the climate news. Step 2 takes us to step back and look at, a bit lightheartedly, at how we've been showing up for the climate crisis, and ask some questions about Who do we think we need to be, and what part of that just we don't need? And being aware of those patterns is enough to start to change and create a healthier climate narrative. Step 3 is just about releasing those patterns of thinking, feeling, the personas that are holding us back. It's about creating space for inspired, sustainable change. And it's about saving the planet by showing up for ourselves. So I'll let that sink in, and please do let me know if you've got any questions. And I'm really grateful for your support and for turning up today and for being part of the Climate Calm community. If this is something that you find helpful, resonates with you, and you're into social media, please do like and follow things on Instagram, where I'm Helen X Draper, and also Helen Draper on LinkedIn. And what I do there is I share a lot of content and free tools that relate to the Climate Calm mission, which is to shift the energy of the climate conversation.